Have you ever noticed that life hurts the most when you argue with it in your mind? Not when something goes wrong, but when you keep saying, "This should not have happened." Buddhism teaches that suffering does not begin with pain. It begins with resistance. The moment you stop fighting reality, something unexpected happens. Your breath softens, your body relaxes, your mind becomes quiet. Life does not change, but your relationship with life does. Happiness does not arrive because everything improves. Happiness arrives because you stop demanding that the present moment be different. This message is not about giving up on life. It is about ending the silent war within yourself. And the moment that war ends, peace begins. 1. Suffering begins when the mind says, "This should not be." Buddhism teaches a very gentle but powerful truth. Pain is a natural part of being human, but suffering is something the mind creates when it refuses to accept what has already happened. Pain comes from life itself. Suffering comes from arguing with life. When something difficult, unexpected, or disappointing happens, the event itself is often brief, but the mind immediately begins its protest. It says, "This is unfair. This should not have happened to me. This is not how my life was supposed to go." That single sentence inside the mind creates a second layer of pain. The body tightens. The breath becomes shallow. The heart feels heavy. Nothing new is happening, yet the suffering grows stronger because the mind is fighting reality. This inner argument is where most suffering lives. You replay the moment again and again, hoping that by thinking harder, feeling angrier, or blaming someone, the past will somehow change. You imagine different outcomes. You question your choices. You punish yourself with regret or resentment. But reality does not respond to mental resistance. What happened has already happened. The more the mind says, "This should not be," the more exhausted and trapped you feel. Buddhism explains that this resistance is like pushing against a wall that will never move. The effort only drains your energy and deepens your frustration. Acceptance does not mean that what happened was good, fair, or desired. Acceptance simply means seeing reality clearly without adding extra suffering to it. It means acknowledging the truth of the moment without attacking yourself or life for it. When you stop arguing with what is, the body begins to relax. The nervous system calms. The mind no longer has to carry the weight of endless protest. This is not weakness. This is wisdom. The moment the mind stops saying, "This should not be," it finally rests. And in that rest, suffering begins to dissolve naturally, not because life changed, but because the inner war has ended. 2. Acceptance is not weakness, it is inner strength. Many people misunderstand acceptance because they confuse it with giving up. They believe that if they accept reality, they are admitting defeat, allowing injustice, or losing their power. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Acceptance is not weakness. Acceptance is one of the greatest inner strengths a human being can develop. When you accept reality, you are not saying that what happened was right or fair. You are saying that it happened, and you are no longer going to exhaust yourself by fighting a truth that cannot be undone. Resistance feels powerful at first. Anger, blame, and denial give the illusion of control. The mind feels active, busy, and loud, but beneath that activity, the heart is tired. Resistance drains energy because it keeps you locked in the past. Acceptance, on the other hand, is quiet, but it is deeply powerful. The moment you accept where you are, all of your energy returns to the present moment. You stop leaking strength into regret and resentment. You become grounded instead of reactive. Buddhism teaches that only a calm mind can see clearly. When you are resisting reality, your vision becomes narrow. You cannot see solutions, growth, or wisdom because the mind is clouded by emotional noise. Acceptance clears that fog. It creates space inside you. In that space, insight appears naturally. You begin to see what can be done instead of obsessing over what should have been done. This is real power. Not the power to control life, but the power to respond to life wisely. Acceptance also protects your dignity. When you fight reality, you often fight yourself. You blame yourself for not being different, stronger, smarter, or faster. You replay moments and criticize your past decisions with today's awareness. Acceptance ends this self-attack. It teaches compassion toward your own journey. You recognize that you acted with the understanding you had at the time. This realization softens the heart and builds inner stability. True strength, according to Buddhism, is not loud or aggressive. It is steady and grounded. It does not panic when life changes direction. It does not collapse when plans fail. Acceptance trains the mind to stay rooted even when circumstances shift. From this rooted place, action becomes effective. You stop reacting emotionally and start moving intentionally. Acceptance does not make you passive. It makes you precise. It allows you to choose your next step without fear clouding your judgment. When you fully accept reality, you stop wasting your strength on what cannot be changed and begin using it for what can be shaped. This is why acceptance is not surrender to life. It is alignment with life. And in that alignment, inner strength grows quietly, deeply, and unshakably. 3. The mind suffers more than the situation ever did. Buddhism teaches that most suffering does not come from what happens to us, but from what the mind does after it happens. The actual event may be painful, disappointing, or shocking, but it often lasts only a short time. What truly drains us is the mental replay that follows. The mind revisits the moment again and again, as if repeating it could somehow rewrite it. It replays conversations, reopens wounds, and keeps emotional pain alive long after the situation has ended. In this way, the mind becomes the place where suffering lives on. When something difficult happens, the body experiences pain naturally. But once the moment passes, the body begins to heal. The mind, however, often refuses to move on. It clings to memory, judgment, and blame. It asks endless questions like, why did this happen? Why me? What if I had done something differently? These thoughts feel useful, but they quietly deepen suffering. Buddhism explains that this is how pain turns into long-lasting distress. The mind becomes attached to the story of the event, instead of allowing the experience to complete itself. This mental repetition creates the illusion that the problem is still happening, even when it is not. The body reacts as if the threat is present, stress returns, anxiety rises, peace feels distant. In reality, nothing new is occurring except the mind's refusal to release the past. Acceptance interrupts this cycle. When you accept what has already happened, the mind no longer needs to keep the story alive. You stop feeding the memory with emotional energy. Slowly, the grip loosens. Buddhism teaches that memories are not enemies, but attachment to them is. You can remember without suffering. You can learn without reliving pain. Acceptance allows this shift to happen naturally. When the mind stops arguing with the past, it regains its ability to rest in the present. You begin to experience moments without the weight of yesterday pressing on them. Life feels lighter, not because the past disappeared, but because it no longer controls your inner world. Happiness grows when you realize that you do not need to solve the past to be at peace with the present. The moment you stop mentally fighting what is already over, the mind quiets. And in that quiet, healing begins. The situation may have caused pain, but the mind does not have to continue suffering long after it has ended. 4. Letting go of control brings immediate relief. One of the deepest causes of suffering, according to Buddhism, is the belief that we must control life in order to feel safe, happy, or at peace. From a young age, the mind is trained to believe that if we plan carefully enough, manage people correctly, and avoid uncertainty, we can protect ourselves from pain. But life does not move according to our expectations. People change, circumstances shift. Effort does not always lead to the outcomes we imagine. When reality refuses to obey our plans, frustration grows, and the heart feels restless and tense. The desire to control life often hides beneath anxiety and anger. You want people to behave a certain way. You want situations to unfold according to your understanding of what is right. You want certainty in a world that constantly changes. When these desires are not met, the mind tightens. It resists, it blames, it worries about the future, or obsesses over mistakes. Buddhism explains that this constant effort to control what cannot be controlled exhausts the mind and creates inner suffering. The struggle is not with life itself, but with the illusion that life should follow your personal script. Letting go of control does not mean becoming careless or irresponsible. It means recognizing the limits of your influence. You can choose your actions, your intentions, and your responses, but you cannot command outcomes, people, or time. When you truly understand this, something inside you relaxes. The body releases tension, the breath becomes slower, the mind feels lighter because it no longer carries the impossible task of controlling the universe. Acceptance brings immediate relief because it ends this inner struggle. The moment you stop demanding that life conform to your expectations, you stop fighting an unwinnable battle. Buddhism teaches that peace arises when effort is placed in the right direction. Instead of controlling outcomes, you focus on right action. Instead of worrying about the future, you stay present with what is here. Instead of resisting uncertainty, you learn to move with it. Letting go of control also deepens trust in life. You begin to understand that not everything needs to be forced. Some things unfold naturally when you stop interfering with fear and impatience. This does not mean life becomes effortless, but it becomes less heavy. You still act, but you act without attachment to results. This shift removes much of the pressure that creates anxiety and disappointment. Buddhism teaches that true freedom comes not from dominating life, but from flowing with it. When you release the need to control, you reclaim inner peace. The mind becomes spacious instead of tense. You respond instead of react. And in this state, happiness begins to arise naturally, not because everything goes your way, but because you are no longer fighting the way things are. 5. Reality is always neutral until the mind resists it. Buddhism teaches a truth that can completely change how you experience life. Reality itself is neutral. Events do not arrive labeled as good or bad, success or failure, blessing or punishment. These labels are created by the mind after the event occurs. When something happens, it simply happens. The suffering begins when the mind immediately judges the experience and starts arguing with it. The mind says this should not be happening, this is wrong, this ruined everything, or this proves something is wrong with me. In that moment, reality has not attacked you, but the mind has turned the experience into a source of pain. From a Buddhist perspective, reality flows like a river. It moves without intention to harm or reward. But the mind stands on the riverbank and throws stones into the water, then complains that the water is disturbed. Those stones are judgments, expectations, comparisons, and resistance. When the mind resists what is happening, even a small inconvenience can feel overwhelming. When the mind accepts what is happening, even difficulty becomes manageable. This is why two people can face the same situation and experience it completely differently. The difference is not the event. The difference is the relationship the mind has with the event. The mind is conditioned to judge because it believes judgment provides safety. It thinks that labeling something as bad will protect you from it. But Buddhism teaches that constant judgment creates tension instead of protection. When you judge reality, the body tightens, the breath becomes shallow, the heart closes. You feel separated from life instead of connected to it. Reality becomes something you are fighting instead of something you are moving through. This internal conflict is where suffering grows strongest. Acceptance dissolves this conflict. When you stop resisting reality, you stop adding emotional weight to the moment. You see the situation clearly, without exaggeration or self-attack. This clarity does not remove challenges, but it removes unnecessary suffering. You begin to understand that many moments were never as heavy as your thoughts made them. The pain was real, but the extra suffering was optional. When resistance ends, the mind regains balance. Buddhism also teaches that resistance creates the illusion of permanence. When you fight an experience, it feels endless. When you accept it, you see that everything is temporary. Emotions rise and fall. Situations change. Even pain has a natural lifespan when it is not fed by resistance. Acceptance allows experiences to complete themselves. Instead of trapping them in the mind, you let them pass through awareness naturally. When you stop arguing with reality, you no longer take everything personally. You stop seeing every challenge as a reflection of your worth or failure. Life becomes less dramatic and more spacious. You understand that reality is not against you. It is simply unfolding. This understanding brings deep relief. You stop exhausting yourself by fighting what already exists and begin conserving energy for wise action. Happiness grows quietly when you stop resisting life. It does not arrive with excitement or noise. It arrives as ease, as lightness, as the absence of inner conflict. When the mind no longer labels every moment as a problem, peace becomes the natural state. Buddhism teaches that happiness is not created by changing reality, but by changing your relationship with it. When resistance falls away, reality reveals itself as something you can live within, not something you must survive. 6. Peace arrives when you stop chasing a different moment. One of the most subtle sources of suffering, according to Buddhism, is the habit of believing that peace exists somewhere other than where you are right now. The mind constantly looks ahead or behind. It imagines a future where things are finally calm, or it clings to a past where life felt easier, happier, or more meaningful. In doing so, the present moment is quietly rejected. The mind says, this moment is not enough. This moment is incomplete. This moment must be escaped or improved before peace can be felt. This silent rejection of the present is a form of resistance, and it creates continuous dissatisfaction. Buddhism teaches that the present moment is the only place where life actually happens. The past exists as memory, and the future exists as imagination, but the body and breath only live now. When the mind keeps chasing a different moment, it splits itself. One part of you lives here, while another part is always elsewhere. This division creates restlessness. You may be sitting quietly, but inside, the mind is rushing. You may be successful, but the heart feels empty because it is always waiting for the next condition to be fulfilled before allowing peace to enter. The belief that happiness depends on a better moment is deeply ingrained. You tell yourself you will be calm when your problems are solved, when people change, when you become stronger, wiser, or more successful. Buddhism gently reveals the flaw in this thinking. Life does not pause until conditions are perfect. Change does not stop once goals are achieved. There will always be something else to fix, improve, or desire. If peace is postponed until everything aligns, it will always remain out of reach. Acceptance brings peace because it ends this endless postponement. When you accept the present moment, you stop negotiating with life. You stop saying, "I will be at peace later." You allow yourself to be fully here, even if this moment is imperfect, uncertain, or uncomfortable. This does not mean you like everything about the present. It means you stop rejecting it. And the moment rejection ends, inner conflict dissolves. Buddhism teaches that suffering grows when you compare this moment to an imagined one. You compare who you are now to who you think you should be. You compare your life to someone else's path. You compare today to yesterday or tomorrow. These comparisons steal peace because they pull attention away from what is real and place it into mental stories. When you stop chasing a different moment, comparison loses its power. You begin to experience life directly instead of measuring it constantly. Staying present does not mean abandoning goals or growth. It means releasing attachment to the idea that fulfillment exists only at the finish line. When you act from presence instead of craving, your actions become lighter and more skillful. You work without desperation. You move forward without anxiety. You rest without guilt. Buddhism teaches that peace is not the absence of movement, but the absence of resistance within movement. When the mind stops chasing a different moment, the body responds immediately. The breath deepens, muscles soften, the nervous system settles. You feel more grounded in your own experience. Small moments regain meaning. Silence feels supportive instead of empty. Even challenges become less threatening because you are no longer trying to escape them mentally. You meet life where it is, not where you wish it were. Buddhism reminds us that the present moment is not an obstacle to happiness. It is the doorway to it. The moment you stop chasing another version of now, you discover that peace was never missing. It was covered by impatience, expectation, and resistance. When those fall away, happiness grows naturally, not as excitement, but as a quiet sense of ease with existence itself. True peace arrives when you realize that you do not need to reach a different moment to be whole. This moment, exactly as it is enough to rest in. When you stop remembering the past with longing and stop imagining the future with fear, the present opens like a safe space. And in that space, you are no longer chasing happiness, you are living within it. 7. Happiness grows quietly when resistance ends. Buddhism teaches that happiness is not something you chase, force, or capture. It is something that reveals itself naturally when resistance disappears. Most people believe happiness must arrive through achievement, excitement, or change. They think it will come when circumstances improve, when problems are solved, or when life finally feels stable. But Buddhism points in a different direction. It teaches that happiness has always been present beneath the struggle. It only becomes visible when the inner fight with reality comes to an end. Resistance is often subtle. It does not always appear as anger or frustration. Sometimes it shows up as quiet dissatisfaction, constant comparison, or the feeling that something is missing. The mind may say life is fine, but it could be better. It may accept the situation on the surface, but deep inside it still argues, it still waits, it still hopes reality will rearrange itself. This low-level resistance keeps the heart restless. Buddhism explains that as long as the mind is resisting even slightly, peace cannot fully settle. When resistance ends, there is an immediate shift inside. The mind stops pushing against the moment. The body feels lighter, the breath moves freely. There is less urgency to fix, explain, or escape what is happening. Happiness begins not as excitement, but as relief. Relief from the constant effort of trying to make life different from what it is. This relief is gentle, but profound. It feels like finally putting down a heavy bag you forgot you were carrying. Buddhism teaches that true happiness is quiet. It does not shout. It does not demand attention. It does not depend on stimulation or validation. It arises as a sense of being at ease with existence itself. When resistance ends, you no longer feel at war with your thoughts, emotions, or circumstances. You stop trying to rearrange life to fit your expectations. Instead, you begin to move with life. This movement brings a deep sense of harmony that excitement can never replace. As resistance dissolves, your relationship with emotions changes. You stop fighting sadness, fear, or uncertainty. You allow them to pass through awareness without judgment. Buddhism teaches that emotions are visitors, not enemies. When you resist them, they stay longer. When you accept them, they complete their natural cycle. This acceptance creates emotional balance. You no longer feel controlled by inner states. You feel spacious enough to hold them without being overwhelmed. Happiness also grows when you stop taking everything personally. Resistance often comes from the belief that life is happening to you, that events are attacks, punishments, or reflections of your worth. Buddhism teaches that life is not personal. It is simply unfolding according to causes and conditions. When you understand this, you stop blaming yourself for every difficulty. You stop blaming others for your inner state. This shift brings immense relief. You begin to experience challenges as part of the human journey rather than personal failures. When resistance ends, gratitude arises naturally. Not forced gratitude, but a quiet appreciation for simple things. The breath, the body, moments of stillness, ordinary experiences regain meaning. You are no longer distracted by what is missing. You become present with what is here. Buddhism teaches that contentment is the soil in which happiness grows. Resistance poisons this soil. Acceptance nourishes it. This quiet happiness is stable because it does not depend on circumstances. It remains even when life is uncertain, even when pain arises. There is a deeper layer of peace beneath it. Buddhism does not promise a life without difficulty. It promises freedom from unnecessary suffering. When resistance ends, difficulty loses its power to dominate the inner world. You feel grounded even when things are not perfect. As happiness grows quietly, your actions change. You become less reactive and more intentional. You speak with clarity instead of emotion. You make decisions from calm awareness rather than fear. Buddhism teaches that wisdom arises from stillness. When the mind is no longer fighting reality, it becomes a clear mirror. From this clarity, compassionate and skillful action flows naturally. The most profound realization comes when you see that happiness was never something you needed to build. It was something you needed to uncover. Resistance covered it, expectation buried it, comparison hid it. The moment you stop arguing with reality, happiness reveals itself as your natural state. Not dramatic, not loud, but deeply satisfying. Buddhism teaches that the end of resistance is the beginning of freedom. Freedom from constant mental struggle, freedom from the need to control life, freedom from the belief that peace must be earned. When resistance ends, you stop searching outside yourself for fulfillment. You rest in the simplicity of being alive. Happiness grows quietly because it does not need effort. It needs space, and space appears when resistance disappears. When you stop fighting life, you stop fighting yourself. And in that surrender to what is, you finally meet the peace that has been waiting within you all along. 8. Acceptance does not end growth. It ends inner war. Many people fear acceptance because they believe it will stop growth. They worry that if they accept life as it is, they will lose motivation, ambition, or the desire to improve. Buddhism teaches something very different. Acceptance does not end growth. It ends the inner war that blocks growth. Growth does not come from self-attack, shame, or resistance. True growth comes from clarity, compassion, and understanding. Acceptance creates the inner conditions where real transformation can finally begin. When you do not accept yourself or your situation, growth becomes aggressive. You try to change because you feel broken, behind, or not enough. This creates pressure inside the mind. You force discipline through fear. You chase improvement through comparison. You push yourself not from wisdom, but from rejection of who you are now. Buddhism teaches that this approach exhausts the heart. Even if you achieve external success, inner peace remains absent because the mind is still fighting itself. Acceptance changes the source of growth. Instead of trying to escape who you are, you begin to understand who you are. You see your habits clearly, without hatred. You observe your patterns without judgment. You acknowledge your limitations without shame. This honest awareness is powerful. When the mind is no longer busy defending, denying, or attacking, it becomes capable of learning. Buddhism teaches that insight arises naturally when the mind is calm and receptive. Growth without acceptance feels like punishment. Growth with acceptance feels like guidance. When you accept your current state, you stop demanding instant transformation. You respect the pace of your own unfolding. This patience removes anxiety. You no longer measure progress through harsh timelines or unrealistic expectations. You grow steadily, not violently. Buddhism teaches that all things ripen in their own time. A seed does not become a tree by force. It grows because conditions are right. Acceptance also changes how you relate to mistakes. Without acceptance, mistakes feel like proof of failure. They become sources of guilt and self-criticism. With acceptance, mistakes become teachers. You no longer define yourself by what went wrong. You study it, you learn from it, you adjust your actions without damaging your self-worth. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is born from experience, not perfection. Acceptance allows experience to teach you instead of wound you. When the inner war ends, energy becomes available. Resistance consumes enormous mental and emotional energy. Fighting reality, fighting yourself, and fighting the past drains vitality. Acceptance frees that energy. Suddenly, you have more patience, more focus, and more emotional space. Growth becomes sustainable because it is no longer fueled by fear, it is fueled by understanding. This is why acceptance feels relieving. It stops unnecessary struggle. Buddhism also teaches that acceptance brings humility. You stop pretending you are in control of everything. You stop believing you should have all the answers. This humility opens the door to wisdom. When you accept uncertainty, you become curious instead of anxious. You listen more deeply. You respond more skillfully. Growth becomes a process of alignment rather than domination. Acceptance does not mean staying the same forever. It means starting from where you are instead of where you think you should be. Every genuine journey begins with honesty. When you accept your present condition, you see clearly what needs care, what needs discipline, and what needs release. This clarity is gentle but precise. Buddhism teaches that right action flows naturally from right understanding. Inner peace grows alongside growth when acceptance is present. You no longer believe that happiness must wait until you are fully healed, fully successful, or fully transformed. You allow peace to exist alongside imperfection. This removes pressure and impatience. You realize that growth is not a race to a future version of yourself. It is a continuous unfolding happening right now. Acceptance also deepens compassion. When you accept your own struggles, you become softer toward the struggles of others. You stop judging people harshly because you understand the complexity of human conditioning. Buddhism teaches that compassion arises naturally when the ego loosens its grip. Acceptance weakens the ego because it no longer needs to defend an ideal image. This creates emotional maturity. When growth comes from acceptance, it is stable. It does not collapse when challenges appear. It does not disappear when motivation fades. It becomes part of your way of living. You grow because it feels natural, not because you are afraid of staying the same. This kind of growth is quiet, steady, and deeply rooted. Buddhism teaches that the most important transformation is not becoming someone else. It is ending the conflict with who you are. When that conflict ends, growth becomes inevitable. Like water flowing downhill, it happens naturally when obstacles are removed. Acceptance removes the biggest obstacle of all: resistance. The moment you stop fighting yourself, you stop sabotaging your own evolution. You create inner harmony instead of inner pressure, and from that harmony, change unfolds with intelligence and grace. Acceptance does not trap you, it frees you to grow without suffering. This is why Buddhism does not separate peace and progress. It understands that peace is the foundation of progress. When acceptance replaces resistance, growth no longer hurts, it heals. And in that healing, you move forward not as an enemy to yourself, but as a companion on your own path. 9. When you stop fighting reality, life starts working with you. Buddhism teaches that life is not something to conquer, dominate, or bend to your will. Life is something to be understood and lived with. Much of human suffering comes from the belief that life is an opponent, that circumstances are obstacles placed in your way, and that happiness must be extracted through struggle. This mindset quietly turns existence into a battlefield. You wake up bracing yourself. You move through days with tension. You constantly feel behind, pressured, or threatened. Buddhism gently reveals that this struggle is not created by life itself, but by the inner resistance you carry toward it. When you fight reality, you are always late to peace. Reality has already arrived, but the mind is still arguing with it. You wish things were different. You replay moments. You demand explanations. You resist endings. This resistance creates friction between you and the natural flow of life. Buddhism explains that suffering grows where friction exists. Like swimming against a current, the more force you apply, the more exhausted you become. The water is not attacking you, you are simply moving against it. The moment you stop fighting reality, something subtle but profound changes. Life does not suddenly become perfect, but it becomes cooperative. You begin to notice that situations move more smoothly when you stop pushing against them internally. This does not mean everything goes your way. It means you stop creating unnecessary obstacles inside yourself. When the mind relaxes its grip, perception becomes clearer. You see opportunities where you once saw threats. You notice solutions where you once saw dead ends. Life feels less hostile because you are no longer meeting it with hostility. Buddhism teaches that reality follows causes and conditions, not personal desires. When you understand this, you stop interpreting events as personal judgments against you. Things happen because conditions came together, not because life is testing or punishing you. This understanding removes a heavy emotional burden. You stop asking why me and start asking what now. This shift is powerful. It moves you from victimhood into awareness. Awareness does not guarantee comfort, but it brings clarity, and clarity makes movement possible. When resistance ends, intuition becomes stronger. The mind is no longer clouded by fear and emotional noise. You begin to sense when to act and when to wait. You become less impulsive and more attuned to timing. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is not something you force into existence. It arises naturally when the mind is quiet. Fighting reality keeps the mind loud. Acceptance creates silence. In that silence, guidance appears. Life also begins to teach you more clearly when you stop fighting it. Every experience carries information, but resistance blocks learning. When you reject an experience, you only feel pain. When you accept it, you begin to understand it. Even difficult moments become meaningful because they reveal something about impermanence, attachment, or expectation. Buddhism teaches that life is a teacher, but only for those who are willing to listen. Acceptance opens the door to learning. When you stop fighting reality, your relationship with effort changes. You still make effort, but it is no longer frantic or desperate. You act without clinging to outcomes. This kind of effort is sustainable. It does not burn you out because it is not driven by fear. Buddhism calls this right effort. Right effort is balanced. It is firm but gentle. It respects both action and rest. Fighting reality creates excessive effort. Acceptance restores balance. You also begin to trust life more deeply. Not blind trust, but informed trust. You see that even when things fall apart, something new forms. You observe that endings create space. Loss reshapes priorities. Change reveals strength. This trust does not make pain disappear, but it prevents despair. You stop believing that a single moment defines your entire existence. Buddhism teaches that all things are in motion. Acceptance allows you to move with that motion instead of being crushed by it. When life starts working with you, it feels as though resistance has been replaced by rhythm. You move through challenges with less internal damage. You recover faster. You adapt more easily. You no longer waste energy on resentment or denial. This creates momentum. Life does not feel stuck because you are no longer stuck inside yourself. The external situation may still be complex, but the inner experience becomes manageable. Buddhism teaches that harmony with life does not come from controlling circumstances, but from aligning with reality. When you align with reality, you stop fighting impermanence. You stop demanding certainty in an uncertain world. You stop expecting permanence from temporary things. This alignment brings deep relief. You finally stop asking life to be something it was never meant to be. As resistance dissolves, gratitude emerges naturally. You notice moments of ease that were previously ignored. You appreciate simplicity. You find meaning in ordinary experiences. Life feels fuller, not because it is more exciting, but because you are more present. Buddhism teaches that presence is the doorway to peace. Fighting reality closes that doorway. Acceptance opens it. The greatest shift happens when you realize that life was never against you. The struggle you felt was not life pushing back. It was your own resistance creating tension. When that resistance ends, life reveals itself as something you can live within rather than survive. You stop bracing yourself for impact and begin walking forward with steadiness. When you stop fighting reality, you stop exhausting yourself. You reclaim energy, clarity, and emotional balance. Life does not become easy, but it becomes workable. And in that workability, peace grows. Not dramatic peace, not perfect peace, but a grounded peace that allows you to meet whatever comes without losing yourself. Buddhism teaches that the end of struggle is not the end of effort. It is the end of unnecessary suffering. When you stop fighting reality, life does not bow to you. You bow to truth. And in that bowing, you rise. 10. Freedom begins the moment you stop demanding that life make sense. One of the deepest and most hidden sources of suffering is the belief that life must always make sense before you can be at peace. The mind wants clear explanations, logical reasons, and satisfying answers. It wants to know why something happened, what lesson it was meant to teach, and how it fits into a larger plan. When answers do not come, the mind becomes restless. It keeps searching, questioning, and replaying events, hoping that understanding will bring relief. Buddhism teaches that this constant demand for meaning can quietly imprison the mind. Life does not always unfold in a way that the human mind can fully understand. Some experiences arrive without warning. Some losses feel unfair. Some endings come without closure. When the mind insists that peace must wait until everything makes sense, suffering continues indefinitely. Buddhism gently points out that clarity often comes after acceptance, not before it. When you refuse to accept what you do not understand, you prolong confusion and pain. The demand for meaning is closely tied to control. The mind believes that if it can understand everything, it can protect itself from future pain. But this belief creates tension. You begin to analyze your life excessively. You search for signs, messages, and explanations in every event. Instead of living, you are constantly interpreting. Buddhism teaches that this over-analysis pulls you away from direct experience. You become lost in thoughts about life rather than present within life itself. Freedom begins when you allow life to be mysterious. This does not mean you stop learning or reflecting. It means you stop forcing answers where none are available yet. When you accept that some things cannot be immediately understood, the mind relaxes. The pressure to solve existence eases. You begin to trust that meaning unfolds naturally over time. Buddhism teaches that wisdom ripens slowly, like fruit. Pulling it before it is ready only creates bitterness. Letting go of the need for immediate understanding also softens the heart. You stop blaming yourself for not knowing what to do or why something happened. You recognize that uncertainty is not a personal failure. It is part of being human. This realization brings humility and compassion. You become gentler with yourself and others. Buddhism teaches that compassion grows when the ego loosens its grip on certainty. When you stop demanding that life makes sense, you stop resisting confusion. Confusion becomes something you move through rather than something you fear. You learn to stay present even when clarity is absent. This ability is powerful. It allows you to remain grounded during change, loss, and transition. Buddhism teaches that impermanence is the nature of life. Expecting permanent clarity in an impermanent world creates suffering. Acceptance of uncertainty also changes how you relate to the future. Instead of obsessing over what might happen, you focus on how you meet what happens. You stop needing guarantees before moving forward. You act with care rather than fear. This creates inner freedom because your peace is no longer dependent on knowing what comes next. Buddhism teaches that the future cannot be controlled, but the present can be met with awareness. When you release the demand for meaning, life feels lighter. Moments no longer need to justify themselves. You allow experiences to be what they are without forcing them into a narrative. Joy becomes simpler. Pain becomes less overwhelming. You stop asking what this says about you and start noticing what this moment is asking from you. This shift brings clarity without struggle. Buddhism also teaches that many answers reveal themselves only after the heart has healed. If you insist on understanding while you are still wounded, your interpretations will be colored by pain. Acceptance creates space for healing. Healing creates space for insight. When insight arrives naturally, it feels calm and grounded rather than urgent and desperate. Freedom deepens when you realize that life does not owe you explanations. It offers experiences, not guarantees. When you accept this, disappointment loses its sharpness. You stop feeling betrayed by reality. You understand that life is not a story written for your comfort, but a flow you are invited to participate in. This understanding brings maturity and emotional resilience. As the demand for meaning fades, presence grows stronger. You become more attentive to what is actually happening instead of what you wish would happen. The senses sharpen. The mind becomes quieter. You experience life directly instead of through constant interpretation. Buddhism teaches that direct experience is the doorway to peace. Thinking about life endlessly closes that doorway. True freedom arises when you no longer need life to explain itself before you can relax. You rest in the not knowing, you trust the unfolding, you move forward without certainty, but with awareness. This does not make you careless, it makes you courageous. Courage is not knowing everything will be okay. Courage is meeting uncertainty without collapsing. When you stop demanding that life makes sense, you stop delaying peace. You realize that peace does not come from understanding everything, it comes from accepting what is here, even when it is unclear. Buddhism teaches that the mind finds rest not in answers, but in surrender to reality as it is. In this surrender, something profound happens. The weight of existence feels lighter. You stop carrying questions like burdens. You allow life to be unfinished. And in that unfinished state, freedom appears. Not because life finally made sense, but because you no longer needed it to. This is the deepest acceptance of all. Acceptance not only of events, but of mystery itself. When you embrace this, you stop fighting life at its deepest level. And when that fight ends, peace is no longer something you search for. It becomes the ground you stand on. 11. When you accept life as it is, you finally come home to yourself. Buddhism teaches that the deepest form of suffering is not pain, loss, or confusion. The deepest suffering is feeling at war with your own existence. Many people move through life with a quiet sense of resistance toward themselves. They believe they should be different, further ahead, stronger, calmer, or more successful by now. This belief creates a constant inner tension. Even during moments of rest, the mind whispers that something is missing, something is wrong, or something needs to be fixed. Buddhism reveals that this restlessness is not caused by life, but by the refusal to fully accept oneself within life. From a Buddhist perspective, acceptance is not just about external events, it is about accepting your inner experience without rejection. Thoughts arise, emotions pass through, sensations change. When you fight these inner movements, you split yourself in two. One part of you observes, while another part judges, resists, or tries to control. This division creates exhaustion. You are never fully present because part of you is always trying to escape yourself. Acceptance ends this inner division. When you allow your inner experience to exist without resistance, something profound happens. You feel whole again. Many people believe that peace will arrive when they become someone else. They imagine a future version of themselves who is finally calm, confident, healed, and complete. Buddhism teaches that this chase keeps you homeless within your own life. You are always moving toward an idea instead of resting in reality. Acceptance invites you to stop running. It invites you to sit with who you are now, not as a final destination, but as a place of truth. When you stop rejecting yourself, the nervous system relaxes, the heart softens. You feel grounded in your own being. Accepting life as it is also means accepting your human limitations. You cannot control everything. You cannot always be strong. You cannot always understand. Buddhism teaches that humility is a doorway to peace. When you accept that you are human, you stop punishing yourself for being imperfect. You stop holding yourself to impossible standards. This does not make you careless. It makes you compassionate. Compassion toward yourself creates emotional stability. From that stability, growth becomes possible. Buddhism explains that much of emotional suffering comes from comparing your inner life to someone else's outer life. You see others appearing confident, successful, or at ease, and you conclude that you are failing. Acceptance breaks this illusion. You recognize that every person carries unseen struggles. You stop measuring your worth against appearances. This realization brings relief. You no longer feel the need to perform, pretend, or prove. you begin to live more honestly. When you accept life as it is, you stop postponing your existence. Many people unconsciously wait for permission to be at peace. They tell themselves they will relax once things improve, once they heal completely, once they reach a certain point. Buddhism teaches that this waiting creates endless dissatisfaction. Life keeps happening, but you are never fully present for it. Acceptance invites you to participate in your life now, even if it is unfinished. This participation brings a sense of belonging that achievement alone can never provide. Coming home to yourself means no longer needing to escape through distraction, comparison, or constant activity. When resistance ends, silence feels safe instead of uncomfortable. Stillness feels nourishing instead of threatening. You are no longer afraid of being alone with your thoughts because you are no longer fighting them. Buddhism teaches that the mind becomes peaceful when it is allowed to settle naturally, not when it is forced into quiet. Acceptance also transforms how you relate to pain. Pain no longer feels like proof that something is wrong with you. It becomes part of the human experience. You allow yourself to feel sadness without drowning in it. You allow yourself to feel fear without letting it control you. This emotional openness creates resilience. Buddhism teaches that what you allow, you can move through. What you resist, you remain trapped in. When you fully accept life as it is, gratitude begins to arise naturally. Not forced gratitude, but a quiet appreciation for simply being alive. You notice the simplicity of breath, movement, and presence. Ordinary moments regain meaning. You are no longer chasing intensity to feel alive. You are alive because you are present. Buddhism teaches that contentment is not found in having more, but in needing less resistance. This acceptance creates a deep sense of safety within yourself. You no longer feel that life is something you must survive. You feel supported by your own awareness. Even when challenges arise, you trust your ability to meet them. This trust is not arrogance. It is grounded confidence built through self-acceptance. You know you can remain present even when things are uncertain. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment is not becoming extraordinary, it is becoming intimate with ordinary reality. When you accept life as it is, you stop seeking escape. You stop seeking completion elsewhere. You realize that you have been standing at the center of your life all along. The search ends not because everything is solved, but because you are no longer rejecting where you are. Coming home to yourself does not mean life becomes perfect. It means you stop abandoning yourself when life becomes difficult. You stay present, you stay kind, you stay grounded. This presence is the deepest form of peace. It is not excitement, it is not constant happiness. It is a steady sense of belonging within your own existence. When acceptance becomes complete, something very gentle unfolds. You feel aligned with life instead of separate from it. You no longer feel like you are trying to catch up or prove something. You feel enough as you are, while still open to growth. Buddhism teaches that this is true freedom. Freedom not from life, but freedom within life. And in this freedom, happiness is no longer something you chase, it is something you allow. It grows quietly as resistance fades. It deepens as self-rejection dissolves. And it remains because it is rooted not in circumstances, but in acceptance of what is. This is the moment you finally come home, not to a place, not to an idea, but to yourself, exactly as you are, exactly where you are, within life as it is now. 12. When acceptance becomes natural, life stops feeling heavy. Buddhism teaches that much of what we call exhaustion is not physical, it is emotional and mental weight created by resistance. Many people feel tired even when they are resting, overwhelmed even when nothing dramatic is happening, and drained even on calm days. This heaviness does not come from life itself. It comes from carrying life with clenched fists. When you resist reality, every experience feels heavier than it needs to be. Acceptance is what allows you to finally set that weight down. From the moment you wake up, the mind often begins negotiating with the day. It judges how things should go, who should behave differently, and what must change for you to feel okay. These silent demands create pressure before anything even happens. Buddhism teaches that this constant inner tension is like carrying a load on your back without realizing it. You move through life braced, guarded, and mentally prepared for disappointment. Acceptance removes this armor, and when the armor comes off, the body and mind finally breathe. When acceptance becomes natural, you no longer meet life with resistance by default. You respond instead of brace. You observe instead of judge. This shift changes how everything feels. Challenges still arise, but they no longer feel like attacks. Problems still exist, but they no longer feel personal. The mind stops tightening around every situation. This relaxation does not make you careless, it makes you efficient. You deal with what is in front of you without dragging unnecessary emotional weight into it. Buddhism teaches that heaviness comes from wanting reality to be different than it is. You want people to understand you. You want situations to resolve faster. You want certainty where none exists. These wants are natural, but when they turn into demands, suffering grows. Acceptance transforms demands back into preferences. You may still prefer things to be different, but you no longer collapse when they are not. This flexibility brings emotional freedom. Life becomes workable instead of overwhelming. As acceptance deepens, your relationship with time changes. You stop feeling rushed internally. Even when you are busy, there is less urgency inside. Buddhism teaches that urgency is often a sign of resistance. You are trying to escape the present moment and reach a future one as quickly as possible. Acceptance allows you to move through time without fighting it. You do what needs to be done, but without panic. This creates a sense of spaciousness even in active days. Heaviness also comes from carrying stories about yourself, stories about failure, weakness, missed opportunities, and regret. When acceptance becomes natural, these stories lose their grip. You see them as thoughts, not truths. You stop identifying with every narrative the mind produces. Buddhism teaches that identification with thought creates suffering, acceptance creates distance. You can witness thoughts without becoming them. This lightens the inner world dramatically. When life stops feeling heavy, joy becomes simpler. You no longer need intense experiences to feel alive. You find ease in ordinary moments. Walking, breathing, sitting quietly, or listening become enough. Buddhism teaches that contentment is not created by adding more to life, but by removing resistance to what is already there. When resistance fades, appreciation arises naturally. You notice beauty without effort. Acceptance also softens how you carry pain. Pain still visits, but it does not dominate. You feel it fully, without drowning in it. You do not add mental commentary that amplifies it. Buddhism teaches that pain multiplied by resistance becomes suffering. Pain met with acceptance remains pain, but it passes more cleanly. This understanding creates resilience. You trust your ability to endure without collapsing. As acceptance becomes embodied, you stop feeling like life is a burden you must carry alone. You feel supported by your own awareness. Even uncertainty becomes lighter because you are no longer demanding guarantees. You trust that you can meet whatever arises. This trust reduces anxiety. The future no longer feels threatening. It feels unknown, but manageable. Buddhism teaches that heaviness is a signal, not a failure. It signals that resistance is present. When you listen to that signal with awareness instead of judgment, you naturally soften. You let go. You return to the breath. Over time, this softening becomes your default state. Acceptance stops being something you practice and becomes something you live. When life stops feeling heavy, you stop needing escape. You no longer crave constant distraction. Silence feels safe. Stillness feels nourishing. You are not afraid of slowing down because you are no longer running from yourself. Buddhism teaches that peace is not found by escaping life, but by inhabiting it fully. Acceptance does not remove responsibility. It removes unnecessary struggle. You still act, you still care, you still grow, but you do so without dragging the weight of resistance behind you. This is why acceptance feels freeing. It gives you your energy back. You stop spending it on internal battles and begin using it for living. Eventually, acceptance becomes so natural that you no longer notice it. Life simply flows. Some days are easy, some days are difficult, but none feel unbearable. You understand that difficulty is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that life is moving. This understanding brings deep calm. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment is not a dramatic event. It is the quiet end of resistance. When acceptance becomes natural, life no longer feels like something you must endure. It feels like something you can walk with. And in that walking, step by step, breath by breath, the weight you once carried dissolves. This is the freedom acceptance offers, not freedom from life, but freedom within life. When life stops feeling heavy, you finally realize that it was never life that was weighing you down. It was resistance. And now that resistance has gently fallen away. 13. When you fully accept reality, you stop needing to escape life. Buddhism teaches that one of the clearest signs of inner suffering is the constant urge to escape. Escape does not always mean running away physically. Most of the time, it appears as distraction, overthinking, numbing, or endlessly seeking something new to avoid what is already here. People escape into memories, fantasies, social media, work, relationships, or constant activity because being present with life feels uncomfortable. Buddhism explains that this discomfort is not caused by life itself. It is caused by resistance to life. When reality is not accepted, the present moment feels unsafe and the mind looks for exits. The desire to escape often begins quietly. You feel restless even when nothing is wrong. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels heavy. The mind searches for stimulation because it believes something is missing. Buddhism teaches that what feels missing is not pleasure or excitement. What feels missing is acceptance. When you resist the present moment, you cannot rest inside it. You must constantly leave it mentally. This is why escape becomes a habit. It is an attempt to find peace somewhere else. When you fully accept reality, the urge to escape begins to dissolve. The present moment no longer feels like a threat. You stop needing to distract yourself from your own experience. This does not mean life suddenly becomes perfect or pleasant at all times. It means you are no longer afraid of being with what is real. Buddhism teaches that fear arises when we believe we cannot handle what we feel. Acceptance proves otherwise. Each time you stay present without resistance, trust in yourself grows. Acceptance also changes how you relate to discomfort. Without acceptance, discomfort feels unbearable. You rush to fix it, suppress it, or run from it. With acceptance, discomfort becomes tolerable. You allow it to exist without labeling it as a problem. Buddhism teaches that discomfort is part of the natural rhythm of life. It comes and goes like weather. When you stop resisting it, it loses much of its intensity. This realization reduces the need to escape because you no longer feel overwhelmed by your inner experience. Many forms of escape are driven by the belief that happiness exists somewhere else, somewhere quieter, easier, more successful, or more secure. Buddhism gently reveals that this belief keeps you dissatisfied. You are never fully present because part of you is always elsewhere. Acceptance brings you back. It teaches you to inhabit your own life instead of waiting for a different one. When you stop rejecting where you are, the need to run fades. When acceptance becomes deep, stillness becomes nourishing. Silence no longer feels empty, it feels spacious. You can sit without needing stimulation. You can be alone without feeling lonely. Buddhism teaches that loneliness often comes from being disconnected from yourself, not from being physically alone. Acceptance reconnects you with your own presence. This connection creates inner companionship. You no longer need constant distraction to feel okay. Acceptance also dissolves the urge to escape the self. Many people secretly believe there is something wrong with them. They escape through improvement, self-criticism, or constant reinvention. Buddhism teaches that while growth is natural, self-rejection creates suffering. When you accept yourself as you are, you stop trying to become someone else just to feel worthy. This does not stop growth. It makes growth gentle. You evolve without abandoning yourself along the way. When the need to escape fades, your energy returns. Escape consumes enormous mental energy. Constantly searching for relief, distraction, or stimulation is exhausting. Acceptance conserves energy because it ends the inner chase. You are no longer running from moment to moment. You stay, you breathe, you respond. This grounded energy feels calm and steady. Life becomes less chaotic because you are no longer scattered internally. Buddhism teaches that presence is the opposite of escape. Presence means fully meeting what is here without judgment or resistance. When presence becomes natural, life feels more vivid and real. You notice details you once missed. Ordinary moments regain depth. You are no longer half living while waiting for something else. You are here. This presence creates a quiet joy that does not depend on excitement. Acceptance also changes how you face pain. Without acceptance, pain feels like something you must escape at all costs. With acceptance, pain becomes something you can sit with. You no longer panic when discomfort arises. You trust your ability to endure without being consumed. Buddhism teaches that courage is not the absence of pain. It is the willingness to be present with pain without running away. This courage grows naturally through acceptance. As acceptance deepens, life stops feeling like something you must survive. You stop bracing yourself for impact. You stop anticipating disappointment. You meet each moment as it comes. This openness creates ease. Even difficult experiences feel more manageable because you are not adding resistance to them. Life becomes something you participate in rather than something you endure. When you no longer need to escape life, relationships change. You stop seeking others to fill emptiness or distract you from yourself. You connect from wholeness instead of need. Buddhism teaches that healthy connection arises when you are at peace with yourself. Acceptance creates that peace. You no longer cling. You share presence instead of seeking rescue. The deepest form of acceptance is trusting yourself with life as it is. Trusting that you can remain present through uncertainty, discomfort, and change. When this trust is established, escape loses its appeal. You realize you do not need to leave your life to find peace. Peace is available in the act of staying. Buddhism teaches that liberation is not found by leaving the world. It is found by ending resistance to the world. When you fully accept reality, you stop trying to escape life. You finally inhabit it. And in that inhabiting, life becomes lighter, clearer, and more intimate. This is not dramatic freedom. It is quiet freedom. Freedom from the need to run. Freedom from the belief that somewhere else is better. Freedom to be where you are without fear. When acceptance reaches this depth, you no longer ask how to escape life. You begin to ask how to live it fully. And that is the moment when happiness stops being something you search for. It becomes something you experience in the simple act of being present, exactly where you are, within life, as it is now. 14. Acceptance teaches you how to live without inner resistance. Buddhism teaches that inner resistance is one of the most invisible forces shaping human suffering. Many people believe their pain comes from external problems, difficult people, or unfortunate circumstances. But beneath all of these experiences lies a deeper struggle. It is the struggle of pushing against life internally. Inner resistance is the habit of mentally tightening around experience, silently saying no to what is already happening, and wishing reality were different in subtle or obvious ways. This resistance creates friction within the mind and body, and over time it becomes exhausting. Inner resistance often begins as a protective mechanism. The mind believes that if it resists pain, confusion, or disappointment, it can shield itself from harm. But Buddhism teaches that resistance does not protect you, it traps you. When you resist an experience, you keep it alive inside you. You replay it, analyze it, judge it, and fight it mentally. This ongoing battle prevents the experience from passing naturally. Instead of moving through you, it becomes lodged within you. Acceptance teaches you how to stop this internal struggle. It does not ask you to like everything that happens. It asks you to stop fighting what has already arrived. When you accept an experience, you allow it to exist without pushing it away or pulling it closer. This neutral allowing creates space. In that space, the experience can complete itself. Buddhism teaches that all experiences are impermanent. They arise, change, and dissolve. Resistance interrupts this natural flow and makes impermanent things feel permanent. Living without inner resistance does not mean living without boundaries or discernment. It means recognizing when your suffering is being amplified by mental opposition. For example, pain may arise in the body, but resistance adds fear and tension to it. Sadness may arise in the heart, but resistance adds shame and self-judgment. Acceptance removes these additional layers. You still feel the experience, but it no longer overwhelms you. As acceptance deepens, you become more sensitive to the moment resistance appears. You notice the tightening in the chest, the clenching of the jaw, the racing thoughts that demand change. Buddhism teaches that awareness is the beginning of freedom. When you see resistance clearly, you no longer have to obey it. You soften instead. You breathe. You allow. This softening has an immediate effect on the nervous system. The body relaxes. The mind slows. The experience becomes more manageable. Acceptance also teaches patience. Resistance wants immediate relief. It wants discomfort to disappear quickly. Acceptance understands that some experiences require time. Buddhism teaches that patience is not passive waiting. It is the willingness to stay present without forcing outcomes. When you live without inner resistance, you stop rushing life. You trust its timing. This trust reduces anxiety and restores inner balance. When resistance fades, clarity emerges. The mind is no longer clouded by emotional struggle. You see situations more accurately. You respond rather than react. Buddhism teaches that right action arises from clear seeing. Acceptance clears the mind by removing emotional noise. You are no longer fighting life, so you can engage with it wisely. Living without inner resistance also transforms how you relate to yourself. You stop criticizing yourself for having certain thoughts or emotions. You allow yourself to be human. This self-acceptance builds emotional resilience. You are no longer afraid of your own inner world. Buddhism teaches that peace comes from befriending your experience, not controlling it. As acceptance becomes a way of living, your days feel less heavy. You are not constantly bracing yourself. You are not mentally rehearsing arguments with reality. You move through life with a softer posture, both physically and mentally. Even challenges feel less threatening because you are no longer fighting them internally. This softness does not make you weak, it makes you adaptable. Acceptance also deepens compassion. When you stop resisting your own experience, you become more understanding of others. You see that everyone is struggling with their own inner resistance. This insight reduces judgment and increases empathy. Buddhism teaches that compassion arises naturally when the ego relaxes its grip on control and certainty. Living without inner resistance does not mean life becomes easy, it means life becomes workable. You still face difficulties, but they do not define you. You still feel pain, but it does not dominate your inner world. Acceptance gives you the ability to stay present even when things are uncertain or uncomfortable. This presence is a form of strength that cannot be shaken by external conditions. Over time, acceptance reshapes your entire relationship with life. You stop seeing life as something to conquer or endure. You see it as something to participate in. Each moment becomes an invitation to meet reality with openness rather than opposition. This shift brings a quiet confidence. You trust yourself to handle whatever arises because you are no longer adding unnecessary struggle. Buddhism teaches that liberation is not found in escaping experience, but in fully allowing it. When acceptance teaches you how to live without inner resistance, you stop wasting energy on internal battles. That energy returns as calm, clarity, and presence. You live more simply, more honestly, and more peacefully. This is the gift of acceptance. It does not change the world. It changes how you meet the world. And in that change, suffering loosens, happiness grows, and life becomes something you can walk with instead of fight against. When you finally stop resisting life from the inside, you discover that peace was never something you needed to find. It was something that appeared the moment resistance ended. 15. When you stop resisting life, you discover a deep and lasting contentment. Buddhism teaches that contentment is not something added to life. It is something revealed when struggle ends. Many people believe contentment will arrive once circumstances improve, once desires are fulfilled, or once life finally feels stable and secure. They imagine contentment as a reward waiting at the end of effort. But Buddhism gently turns this belief upside down. It teaches that contentment appears when you stop demanding that life be other than what it is. It is not a destination. It is the natural state that emerges when resistance dissolves. Resistance keeps the heart restless. Even when things are going well, the mind looks ahead, searching for what could go wrong or what could be better. Even in moments of success, there is fear of loss. Even in moments of calm, there is the urge to improve, optimize, or secure the experience. Buddhism explains that this constant reaching prevents satisfaction. You are never fully here because part of you is always elsewhere. Contentment cannot grow in a mind that is always leaning forward. When you stop resisting life, the mind gradually relaxes its grip on wanting. Wanting does not disappear, but it softens. You may still have goals and preferences, but they no longer control your sense of well-being. Buddhism teaches that craving is the root of suffering, not because desire is wrong, but because clinging turns desire into dependence. When happiness depends on outcomes, peace becomes fragile. Acceptance removes this fragility. You begin to feel okay even when desires are unmet. Contentment emerges as a quiet satisfaction with being alive. It does not require excitement or constant pleasure. It feels like enoughness. You are not desperate for the next thing to arrive. You are not anxious for the current moment to end. You are present without urgency. Buddhism teaches that this state is deeply nourishing because it restores balance to the nervous system and clarity to the mind. As resistance fades, you stop measuring life constantly. You no longer ask if you are ahead or behind, winning or losing, succeeding or failing. These comparisons lose importance because you are no longer using them to define your worth. Buddhism teaches that comparison arises from insecurity. When acceptance stabilizes the heart, comparison dissolves naturally. You begin to walk your path without constantly looking sideways. Contentment also changes how you experience pleasure. Without resistance, pleasure becomes simple and clean. You enjoy it without clinging. You allow it to pass without panic. Buddhism teaches that suffering often comes not from pleasure itself, but from fear of its ending. When acceptance is present, you trust impermanence. You enjoy what comes without demanding it stay. This trust creates emotional freedom. When contentment deepens, your relationship with pain transforms. Pain still arises, but it does not destroy your sense of peace. You understand that pain is part of life, not a sign that something has gone wrong. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is knowing how to suffer less, not how to avoid suffering entirely. Contentment provides this wisdom. It gives you a stable inner ground even when conditions are difficult. Stopping resistance also ends the constant need to justify your life. Many people feel pressured to prove that their life has value, meaning, or success. They seek validation through productivity, achievement, or recognition. Buddhism teaches that this pressure comes from self-doubt. When acceptance settles deeply, you no longer feel the need to prove your existence. You know you belong simply because you are here. This knowing brings deep relief. Contentment grows stronger as you simplify your inner world. You let go of unnecessary mental noise. You stop carrying old resentments. You release expectations that no longer serve you. Buddhism teaches that simplicity is a form of wisdom. When the mind becomes simpler, life feels richer. You notice small moments. You appreciate ordinary experiences. You feel connected to life instead of chasing it. When resistance ends, gratitude arises naturally. Not forced gratitude that tries to deny pain, but honest gratitude rooted in presence. You appreciate the breath, the body, and the opportunity to experience this moment. Buddhism teaches that gratitude is not about ignoring difficulty. It is about recognizing what is still here, despite difficulty. This recognition strengthens contentment. Contentment also creates emotional stability. You are less shaken by praise or blame. You are less reactive to success or failure. Buddhism teaches that equanimity is a sign of deep understanding. When acceptance becomes steady, emotional extremes soften. You feel balanced. This balance does not mean indifference. It means inner steadiness. As contentment matures, you stop searching for fulfillment outside yourself. You still engage with life, but you no longer believe happiness depends on external conditions. This inner independence is deeply freeing. Buddhism teaches that freedom is not having everything you want, but wanting less from what you have. Contentment fulfills this teaching naturally. Living with contentment does not make life dull. It makes life clear. You are no longer distracted by dissatisfaction. You see life as it is. You engage fully without craving constant stimulation. This clarity brings a quiet joy that is stable and enduring. Buddhism teaches that lasting happiness is peaceful, not exciting. When you stop resisting life, contentment becomes your baseline. You still experience ups and downs, but they do not define you. You return easily to balance. You trust the rhythm of life. This trust creates resilience. You are no longer afraid of change because you are grounded in acceptance. Ultimately, Buddhism teaches that contentment is the heart at rest. It is the mind no longer arguing with reality. It is the end of the inner struggle to control, escape, or improve every moment. When resistance ends, contentment fills the space it once occupied. This contentment is not something you achieve through effort. It is something you uncover by letting go. Letting go of resistance, letting go of demands, letting go of the belief that happiness is somewhere else. When you let go in this way, you discover that contentment was never missing. It was waiting quietly beneath the struggle. And now that the struggle has softened, contentment rises naturally, steady and deep as the simple joy of being alive, exactly as life is now. 16. When acceptance is complete, peace no longer depends on conditions. Buddhism teaches that one of the final roots of suffering is conditional peace. This is the habit of allowing peace only when certain requirements are met. When life is calm, you allow yourself to relax. When people behave the way you hope, you feel at ease. When circumstances are favorable, peace seems possible. But the moment conditions change, peace disappears. This creates a fragile inner world where calm depends on forces you cannot control. Buddhism gently reveals that as long as peace depends on conditions, it will never be stable. Conditional peace keeps the mind on edge. You are always monitoring life, checking whether things are safe enough to relax. Even during good moments, there is tension underneath because you know conditions can change at any time. This quiet anxiety drains joy from the present. You may appear calm on the surface, but inside you are bracing for disruption. Buddhism teaches that true peace cannot rest on something that is constantly shifting. Impermanence makes conditional peace unreliable. Acceptance completes itself when you no longer wait for life to improve before allowing peace. This does not mean you stop responding to challenges or improving your situation. It means peace is no longer postponed. You stop telling yourself that you will relax later, when things settle down, when people change, or when you finally feel secure. Buddhism teaches that peace is not a reward for favorable circumstances. It is a way of meeting whatever circumstances arise. When acceptance is complete, peace becomes unconditional. It is not disturbed by success or failure, gain or loss, praise or blame. These experiences still register, but they no longer shake your inner stability. Buddhism calls this equanimity. Equanimity is not emotional numbness, it is emotional balance. You feel fully, but you are not pulled off center by what you feel. This balance arises naturally when resistance ends at every level. Many people fear unconditional peace because they believe it will make them passive or indifferent. Buddhism teaches the opposite. When peace is no longer dependent on conditions, you actually become more engaged with life. You act without fear. You speak without needing approval. You make decisions without desperation. Because peace is not at stake, you are free to respond honestly. Conditional peace creates fear of loss. Unconditional peace creates courage. Acceptance becomes complete when you stop dividing experience into acceptable and unacceptable categories. You stop saying this feeling is allowed, but that one is not. You stop saying this moment is worthy of peace, but that one is not. Buddhism teaches that this division is the source of inner conflict. When all experience is allowed to exist without resistance, the mind no longer has to defend itself. This openness brings deep calm. When peace no longer depends on conditions, your relationship with uncertainty changes. Uncertainty no longer feels like a threat. It feels like part of life's movement. You stop needing guarantees to feel okay. You trust your ability to remain present even when outcomes are unknown. Buddhism teaches that clinging to certainty creates fear because certainty does not exist. Acceptance of uncertainty dissolves this fear and replaces it with steadiness. This unconditional peace also transforms how you relate to other people. You stop needing others to behave in certain ways for you to be okay. You still have boundaries, but you are no longer emotionally dependent on others' actions. Buddhism teaches that attachment to people's behavior creates suffering. Acceptance frees you from this attachment. You meet people as they are without collapsing when they disappoint you. As acceptance deepens, emotional waves become less overwhelming. Anger may arise, but it passes more quickly. Sadness may appear, but it does not consume you. Joy arises, but you do not cling to it. Buddhism teaches that emotions are impermanent movements of energy. When you stop resisting them, they flow through naturally. Peace remains because it is no longer tied to emotional states. When peace becomes unconditional, life feels more spacious. You are not constantly guarding your inner state. You are not fighting to stay calm. Calmness arises naturally because nothing is being pushed away. This spaciousness allows insight to emerge. You see life more clearly. You understand that everything is changing and that this change does not threaten your core stability. Buddhism teaches that the deepest freedom is freedom from inner dependency. When peace no longer depends on outcomes, opinions, or circumstances, you are free. You still care, but you are not controlled by what you care about. This freedom is subtle but profound. It allows you to live fully without fear of losing yourself. Acceptance becomes complete when you no longer need life to cooperate for you to be at peace. You stop negotiating with reality. You stop saying, "If this happens, then I can relax." You relax first. From that relaxation, action becomes wiser and more effective. Buddhism teaches that clarity arises from calm, not from struggle. Unconditional peace does not mean life becomes smooth. It means you stop being shaken by roughness. You understand that difficulty is part of existence, not a personal failure. You meet challenges with steadiness instead of panic. This steadiness allows you to endure without hardening and to act without aggression. As acceptance matures, peace becomes your natural state. You return to it easily after disturbances. You do not cling to it or fear losing it. It is simply there, like the ground beneath your feet. Buddhism teaches that this is the end of suffering, not the end of pain, but the end of inner conflict. When acceptance is complete, you stop asking how to protect your peace. You realize peace does not need protection. It was only fragile when it depended on conditions. Now it is rooted in understanding. Understanding of impermanence, understanding of non-attachment, understanding of reality as it is. This is the quiet culmination of the path. Not excitement, not achievement, but a deep, steady peace that remains through change, a peace that does not require explanation, a peace that does not wait for permission. When acceptance is complete, peace is no longer something you seek, it is something you live from. And from this peace, life unfolds naturally, without resistance, without fear, and without the constant need for things to be different. This is the freedom Buddhism points toward. Not freedom from life, but freedom within life. 17. When acceptance is fully lived, life becomes simple, clear, and honest. Buddhism teaches that much of the complexity people feel in life is not created by events, responsibilities, or challenges. It is created by inner resistance, emotional avoidance, and mental negotiation with reality. Life itself is simple in its movement. Moments arise, pass, and transform. But the mind complicates this natural flow by constantly evaluating, judging, comparing, and resisting what is happening. When acceptance is fully lived, this unnecessary complexity begins to fall away, and life reveals itself as far more simple, clear, and honest than it once appeared. Simplicity does not mean life becomes empty or shallow. It means the mind stops adding extra layers of struggle to every experience. You no longer replay conversations endlessly. You no longer overanalyze every feeling. You no longer exhaust yourself trying to control impressions, outcomes, or perceptions. Buddhism teaches that simplicity is the natural state of awareness when resistance is absent. When you accept life as it is, you meet each moment directly, instead of filtering it through fear and expectation. As acceptance deepens, clarity emerges naturally. You begin to see situations as they are, rather than as you fear they might be or wish they would be. This clarity is not harsh or judgmental. It is gentle and precise. You understand what is within your control and what is not. You recognize when action is needed and when patience is wiser. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is not forced understanding. It is clear seeing born from a calm mind. Acceptance creates that calm. Living with acceptance also brings honesty into your life. You stop lying to yourself about what you feel, what you need, and what is no longer working. Resistance often keeps people trapped in denial. They stay in situations that drain them, carry emotions they never express, and follow paths that no longer align with their values. Acceptance removes this inner dishonesty. When you stop resisting reality, you stop resisting truth. And when truth is allowed, life begins to align naturally. This honesty extends to your relationship with emotions. You no longer pretend to be okay when you are not. You allow sadness without drama. You allow fear without shame. Buddhism teaches that emotions are signals, not flaws. When you accept them, they guide you. When you resist them, they confuse you. Acceptance restores this guidance system. You listen inwardly and respond wisely instead of suppressing or exploding. As life becomes simpler, your energy returns. Complexity drains energy because it requires constant mental effort. When acceptance becomes a way of living, the mind rests more often. You stop carrying unnecessary worries. You let go of battles that do not need to be fought. Buddhism teaches that conservation of energy is essential for inner peace. When resistance ends, energy flows back into presence, creativity, and compassion. Clarity also transforms your decisions. Without resistance, decisions feel less dramatic. You are no longer paralyzed by fear of making the wrong choice. You understand that no choice guarantees certainty. Buddhism teaches that right action comes from awareness, not from perfection. Acceptance allows you to choose with humility and move forward without excessive self-criticism. If mistakes happen, you learn without collapsing. When life becomes honest, relationships change. You stop performing to be accepted. You stop hiding parts of yourself to avoid conflict. Acceptance gives you the courage to be real. This does not mean being harsh or insensitive. It means being aligned. Buddhism teaches that authenticity is peaceful because it requires no maintenance. When you are honest with yourself, honesty with others follows naturally. Simplicity also brings freedom from comparison. You stop measuring your life against imagined standards or other people's timelines. Acceptance anchors you in your own experience. You understand that each path unfolds differently. Buddhism teaches that comparison is a form of self-violence. When acceptance ends this habit, self-respect grows. You walk your path without constant doubt. As acceptance is fully lived, your inner dialogue softens. The voice of self-criticism loses its authority. You no longer motivate yourself through pressure and fear. You act from understanding. Buddhism teaches that kindness toward the self is not indulgence. It is wisdom. A mind that is treated gently becomes clear and resilient. Life also becomes more present. You are no longer distracted by regret about the past or anxiety about the future. Acceptance roots you in now. This presence makes ordinary moments meaningful. You notice small details. You listen more deeply. You move more slowly. Buddhism teaches that presence is the doorway to peace. When acceptance stabilizes presence, peace becomes continuous rather than occasional. When acceptance is fully lived, effort becomes clean. You still work, strive and grow, but without desperation. You are no longer trying to outrun discomfort or prove worth. Your actions come from alignment rather than fear. This makes effort sustainable. Buddhism teaches that right effort is balanced, neither forced nor lazy. Acceptance restores this balance. Honesty with life also means accepting impermanence. You stop demanding that things last forever. You enjoy what is here without clinging. You grieve losses without resisting. Buddhism teaches that suffering increases when you fight impermanence. Acceptance allows you to flow with change rather than be crushed by it. This creates emotional maturity. As life becomes simpler and clearer, joy becomes quieter but deeper. You are not chasing constant excitement. You appreciate calm. You find satisfaction in enoughness. Buddhism teaches that true happiness is stable because it is not dependent on stimulation. Acceptance creates this stability. When acceptance is fully lived, you stop complicating your existence. You stop asking life to explain itself. You stop negotiating with reality. You stop postponing peace. You live directly, honestly, and simply. This way of living does not remove challenges, but it removes unnecessary suffering. In this simplicity, clarity, and honesty, you discover a deep sense of freedom. Freedom from inner conflict, freedom from constant self-correction. Freedom from the belief that life must be different for you to be at peace. Buddhism teaches that this freedom is the fruit of acceptance fully embodied. When acceptance is no longer something you practice but something you live, life no longer feels like a puzzle to solve or a problem to fix. It feels like a path to walk, step by step, breath by breath, with awareness and ease. This is the quiet wisdom acceptance offers, not a dramatic transformation, but a gentle return to simplicity, a clarity that sees without fear, an honesty that lives without masks, and a peace that comes not from controlling life, but from living it as it is. Buddhism teaches that the search for happiness often leads people in the wrong direction. Many spend their lives trying to fix, improve, escape, or control reality, believing that peace will arrive once life finally becomes acceptable. But through every lesson you have heard, one truth quietly reveals itself again and again. Happiness was never absent from your life. It was simply covered by resistance. The moment you stop arguing with reality, the struggle softens. And when the struggle softens, peace naturally appears. Suffering was never created by life itself. It was created by the mind's refusal to allow life to be as it is. Every time the mind said this should not be happening, suffering grew stronger. Every time the mind demanded certainty, fairness, or explanation, tension took root. But when acceptance entered, even briefly, something shifted. The body relaxed. The breath deepened. The heart felt lighter. This was not coincidence. This was the natural response of a mind no longer fighting reality. Acceptance does not make life perfect. It makes life workable. Pain may still arise. Loss may still occur. Uncertainty will always be part of existence. Buddhism never promised a world without difficulty. It offered something far more powerful: freedom from unnecessary suffering, freedom from the inner war, freedom from the belief that peace must wait for better conditions. When you stop resisting life, you stop abandoning yourself. You stay present even when things are uncomfortable. You remain grounded even when answers are unclear. You move forward without needing guarantees. This is not weakness. This is the deepest strength a human being can develop, the strength to remain open, steady, and aware in a changing world. Happiness, as Buddhism reveals, is not excitement, achievement, or constant pleasure. It is a quiet contentment that grows when resistance fades. It is the ease of no longer needing to escape the present moment. It is the relief of no longer carrying the weight of constant judgment and comparison. It is the peace of knowing that you can meet life as it comes without losing yourself. As acceptance becomes a way of living, life feels simpler, clearer, more honest. You stop complicating your existence with endless mental negotiation. You stop waiting for permission to rest. You stop chasing a future version of yourself in order to feel whole. You realize that wholeness was always available in this moment, exactly as it is. The mind no longer needs to control everything. The heart no longer needs to be defended constantly. The nervous system finally learns that it is safe to relax. From this relaxation, wisdom grows naturally. Compassion deepens, presence becomes steady, and peace stops being something you search for. It becomes something you live from. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment is not becoming extraordinary. It is becoming intimate with reality. When you accept life as it is, without resistance, without denial, without inner violence, you come home to yourself. You no longer feel like life is something you must survive. You feel like life is something you are allowed to inhabit fully. This is the final teaching, not a rule to follow, not a belief to adopt, but a simple truth to live. The moment you stop arguing with reality is the moment happiness begins to grow, quietly, gently, naturally. You do not need to change who you are to deserve peace. You do not need life to make sense to be at ease. You do not need perfect conditions to rest. You only need to stop fighting what already is. And when that fight ends, even for a moment, you will feel it. The softening, the relief, the peace. That peace was always yours.